The Day of the African Child was instituted by the then Organization of Africa Unity in memory of the 16th June 1976 student uprising in Soweto, South Africa. Since then, the OAU and its successor, the African Union, have used the Day of the African Child to remember these children, to celebrate children in Africa, as well as to inspire a sober reflection and action towards addressing the plethora of challenges that children in Africa face on a daily basis. Every year, there's a different theme. Last year was about children and accessing justice. This year is taking stock of the 30 years after the adoption of the Charter and looking at accelerating the implementation of Agenda 2040 for an Africa that's fit for children. An Africa that's fit for children is an Africa that ensures that its children are taken care of, its children are safe, its children are well fed, its children are well clothed and housed, basics. Its children are well educated, its children have access to justice, its children have access to everything else that a human being should have access to, including good upbringing, good parenting, and good guidance, and all those things. Today, let's focus on protection. Is the African child truly protected? And then the question would ask is, protected from what? Against what?
I think take your pick, really. If you are talking about the harm that can visit an African child, you want to ask yourself, what is the rate of political stability on this particular continent? With all these warring factions that we keep reading about, and with all the mismanagement of the economies of this continent, when you talk about families being at a point of desperation in many of these cases, the net sufferer of all these statistics that we talk about is a child. And not very far from the child will be the mother. It is something that is a net consequence of what we see repeatedly on this continent. Leaders who seem to think that it is far better to keep fighting for something that actually isn't theirs in the name of the people who are actually suffering, or in countries where they have stability, continuing to talk about things that you're doing and many of which you actually don't even do. So what it means is the benefit that should accrue to an African child, start with an African family, an African home, doesn't get to them. So again, as I said, the net sufferer is the African child.
When there's no stability, when there's no peace and safety in the home, then the child suffers.
The child suffers immensely.
When there's no feeling of future and hope among the adults in the household,
The child
suffers. Because the child also doesn't have hope, something to aspire to, to look up to, a clear path towards success in later life. So very many of these aspects are maybe what we'll be discussing. But let's bring in some people who deal with matters of children on a daily basis. There's an organization called Compassion International Kenya. The national director, Joel Macharia, joins us now on the line alongside Miriam Mutuku, who's a child protection specialist. Good morning, Joel and Miriam.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you're having a lovely day of the African child.
Yes, indeed.
Let's start with you, Joel. Just take us through, what is Compassion International Kenya? What do you do? When was it established? What kind of programs are you involved in?
So Compassion International started in Kenya in 1980. So we've just done about 40 years. But the organization started back in 1952 in South Korea. So we work in partnership with local churches across the country. We are currently in partnership with 453 churches. That is in those 453 communities spread across actually in 30 counties, and directly serving just over 130,000 children and young people. In the program, we support young people to thrive in life through education, both formal and informal education, healthcare, socio-emotional development, and Christian discipleship.
It sounds like a basket load of things that you do around the country. Supporting 130,000 children and young people, that's a big number as well. So what made you to focus on these particular areas: education, health, socio-emotional well-being?
So we basically look at what does a child need to thrive, and our focus is children who are from very low income households, basically living at the point at which we get involved in their lives. They're basically coming from extremely poor homes. That's economically poor. So the idea for children coming from such homes, they basically tend to get caught up in a vicious cycle where they don't get the right opportunities in life to be able to thrive and therefore break the intergenerational cycle of poverty. So when we get involved, we basically look at what does a human being actually need to thrive in life. And there are a number of components which we call a holistic approach. So those are the ones I described earlier. So that's formal and informal education, right from preschool to university, vocational, technical vocational training for those that is their track, and mid-level colleges for others, depending on their aptitude and their interest in life. Then there's healthcare. Then there's issues of social-emotional development. And this is a very important area, the social-emotional aspect that is easily neglected. When you think about it, if you are growing up in a very, in a very poor, economically poor home, you basically, and you're watching and looking around and seeing other people going about their lives, and they seem to have it very well and easy in their lives. It does have an implication in terms of begin to think you are less than them. So, and it can limit how you think about yourself, your hope, your resilience in life. So that's a very important component to actually focus on. We call it rebuilding the internal asset of the person, so that then they can look up, see horizons, better horizons, see a better future, and therefore catalyze the process of change and moving from where they are. They're not really caught up and held up in the current reality, and begin to envision a better future. And then we create a plan together with them to navigate from where they are to their desired future. That's a very important component. Yeah.
So a lot of the children who are growing up in some of these very difficult situations, whether it's for lack of food or extreme poverty that we see, then that results in other things that they then are not able to access certain rights like education and protection from violence and abuse and things like this. It is a situation that they have grown up in. And this is what causes the issues that they then suffer from. So even as this child is removed from this situation and then given an opportunity, for example, to go to school and to have 3 meals a day and such, it hasn't solved the problem that they grew up in. It removes them from that and gives them an opportunity. But then trying to imagine that any other child who grows up in that situation will go through the same problems. Should we be focusing in terms of impact also on the situation that causes the problem where these children are then suffering these things? Because more children continue to come up. And in as much as we may help one child see these horizons that you're talking about and embrace this new way of life, the situation that caused the problem still exists. So when we're talking about impact and implementation of some of these rights as we go along, should we be looking at the cause of some of these issues and dealing with those directly?
Yeah, that's an excellent point that you make, and that's very, very true. So there's the environment where the child is growing up in. When you think about a plant, for instance, it needs certain conditions to be true for that plant to thrive. The same way with human life. So whereas the focus is on a particular child, actually, when you are focused on a child, then inevitably you have to focus on the environment that they are growing up in. So in a broader way, we also we actually focus also on the systemic, what we call the systemic issues that are really causing that vulnerability to be there in the first place. At the same time, helping the young people and children to be able to actually get the right opportunities to thrive in life. And some of these issues, typically when you look at where these children are growing up in, one of the conditions, like a lot of the conditions that you find in the family, for instance, most of them tend to be from single moms' homes. The others are being taken care of by like a grandmother, because in some places where you have had a very serious problem of HIV and AIDS, you find there's a missing generation. So young people and children are being brought up by the grandmother, typically. Others are actually headed by an older child, or being taken care of by a relative. So there are all these conditions and there are all these situations. So there are other programs that we actually do to address the systemic issues or the environment where the children are growing up in. So there are issues to do with, we invest in things like, family empowerment, economic empowerment, and also parenting issues. And other things that help to build community environment issues. There are a lot of issues that, for instance, when you look at the issue of food security, a lot of it has to do with how people then live, in terms of, like, for instance, you find a lot of people will be cutting trees and clearing vegetation to plant crops and to find firewood and things like that. And that destroys the environment. The good soils are washed down the rivers when rains come, and then you find the problem of food insecurity crops up in. So you have to have a holistic and systemic approach to addressing the question of poverty. But at the same time, what do you do with those who are already in that situation? So it's not either or, but it's both.
Miriam Mutuku, as we're looking at protections for children, a question for you is that I even look at reports today. Violence in childhood still common in the country. We are looking at abuse of children, reports of the same increasing year on year, and a lot of children being defiled by people unknown to them, but then more and more by people known to them. In terms of protection for children, where are we 20 years ago and what are we seeing today? It seems to me that the situation is getting worse. And if we are protecting children, it seems that this is one of the big issues when it comes to their protection that is quite rampant now.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the question. And yes, there are many cases of child abuse. We keep seeing this in the media. Yes, I would say that overall, over the period of 30 years that we are celebrating, the 30 years after the adoption of the African Charter, there are strides that have been made to put in place policies and put in place legal framework by government to continually ensure that the rights of children are upheld. But again, I think there are other factors that have contributed rather to the increasing number of abuse of children in our community and generally in the country. And one of the things we note is that whereas the policies and other frameworks are available, there has been a hurdle that we haven't crossed in terms of translating those policies into practical things that are being done to enforce the law. For example, if I can give an example, when a child is abused and the matter is reported to the police and goes to court, sometimes the implementation, right from the police to the courts of law, the process of seeking justice for the child is quite tedious, sometimes very expensive. And when that happens, that means the perpetrators get away with it. And the moment a perpetrator knows they can beat the system or that there is a weakness in the implementation, then we continually have cases of abuse that are growing by the day because the system is not actively curtailing or being implemented to protect the child. So that has been part of the weakness. We have seen that in the implementation of the available laws and policies, there has been some lapse in terms of getting justice for children and holding the perpetrators to account.
But
I believe
Miriam,
that
is
is
there
one
an
of the
appetite? Is there an appetite for this? Because as I see things, even across the world, that if you find that within the justice system or at government, if there is an appetite to actually see some kind of change, then you will see the implementation of some of these frameworks that you're talking about then happen much quicker. That then the time that it would take to implement some of these things becomes shorter, and that you will see some of these cases actually get more attention much faster. But it would appear that the situation from which these children are arising from continues to be dire. The children then become the most vulnerable, and that's why they are picked on. A kind of safety net system, then, if you were to take a child out of an abusive situation, where are you going to take them? That system also is extremely weak right now. So then the only option is for them to remain at home where they continue to be abused. So do you see that there is an appetite to kind of fix all of this? Or are we trying to save children on a one-on-one basis and hope that things get better?
I believe the issue of protection of children requires a concerted effort, what we call a multi-sectoral approach, where we involve not only government, but other stakeholders, other agencies, and CSOs that would come together and stand up and advocate for the child. Because this is the agenda of protecting children can only be successful if every stakeholder is playing their part. When government is able to coordinate the effort and they're on the front line bringing together all the other players, then it would be possible to have a society or a country where children are safe, children are protected, because every function, for example, of government and all the other key players from the police to the judicial system and the CSOs are involved and are speaking one voice to advocate for the child. But as it is, I think there is need for coordination of efforts and a prioritization of the protection of children by government, first and foremost, even as the other players join in that effort of the government.
And as you say that, I agree with you. I mean, there is need to prioritize and mainstream the issue of children protection at government level. But I've got to ask the question, do all these stakeholders speak the same language? Are they reading the same page of the same book? So, for example, when you have CSOs on the ground and then you have the government officers on the ground, and the other critical stakeholder in the protection of children is the community, the adults in the community, do they all speak the same language? And I'm asking this because if they were all speaking the same language, then the basics would be sorted. The child welfare officers or the social workers in the community would feel empowered and emboldened to deal with the issues they deal with. But I get a sense that they don't. And it comes from the community itself looking at them differently, and maybe the CSOs and the NGOs that are working on the ground approaching it differently. What do you think?
I would say that what the CSOs have been doing is complementing government efforts. And therefore, as we try to intervene in situations and try to step in to help children who are vulnerable, there has to be a point at which the coordination is happening from a central place. And I believe that's the place of government. So we do have a forum, an NGO forum, and several organizations focusing on children have come together and trying to put together the ideas and strategies of how can we jointly be able to move the agenda of child protection in collaboration with government. So there is that effort to come together. But again, because this is the protection of children is a mandate of government, then that requires that there's that leading from the front that would enable and create an enabling environment for that forecast approach to the issues of children and their protection.
Today, the 16th day of June 2021, as happens every year for the last 30 years, is the Day of the African Child. And we are asking ourselves whether the African child is truly protected. Is the Kenyan child truly protected? Joining us on the line are two guests from Compassion International Kenya, Joel Macharia, the National Director, and Child Protection Specialist Miriam Mutuku. Miriam, before we went to the break, we were talking about the various roles that the various organizations and stakeholders have to play in this. The government has a central role in ensuring protection of the child. Various civil society organizations working on the ground, coming in to complement the job that the government is doing. You haven't mentioned much the role of the community, the adults in the community. What role do they play?
Yes, indeed, the community is a place we begin because everyone has a duty to protect children. And therefore, even with government efforts and the good policies that we have, the CSOs on board, the community is a key player in the agenda of protecting children. And I think there's been a lot of effort to create awareness more than ever before. And also the media has been very intentional to highlight issues of child protection. So the community comes on board by taking responsibility and taking their place in ensuring the child next door is safe. If I notice, for example, a child of a neighbor is being neglected, it is my duty to take action. If I need to report to the local chief or the children's officer, then in that sense, if everyone is taking a responsibility for their children in their area, then would have a safer society for children. So community plays a key role in becoming the people on the ground who are actually looking out for the interest and the welfare of the children, even before government and other CSOs come on board. Yeah.
That's right. I want to throw what CT would call the cat among the pigeons here and say very many organizations such as yourselves and other civil society organizations, NGOs, when they're dealing with the issue of children, they look at the community from a point of community needs to be sensitized. Awareness needs to be created within the community about their role. Forgetting that before government, before CSOs, community has always been there. Children have grown up in communities. And maybe the approach then is wrong because, and that's what I was asking earlier about possibilities of conflict between enforcement agencies and CSOs and the community with little regard to how the community wants to protect its children. Because the one thing that's there is that the community is the one that's creating the children. The community knows, therefore, that they have a responsibility with the children. Why do we look at them like they need to be taught? They need to be shown. They need to be made aware of their role with the children. They are the ones who brought the children to the world.
True.
Thank you. That's a fair point. I remember growing up in rural central part of the country, in a rural area, and every single person had some type of a caregiver role. You know, if I was misbehaving or misbehaving, someone would either, deal with that on the spot or report that to my parents. So in a sense, it gave a credence to what the saying that it takes a village to raise a child, and that's really true. But the truth is that social fabric has broken down to a large extent, especially so in urban areas and among the urban poor. That's really a big issue. So where you find now, it's almost everyone for themselves and God for us all situation. So in that kind of situation then, part of what we aim to do and we work towards doing is to rebuild community. And I think I talked about that earlier. So that you have that sense of common, everyone is taking responsibility for certain things, and people are coming together and rebuilding that fabric because it has been broken down. And you see, of course, there are issues where people are careful to even get involved in someone else's lives, or seem to be interfering with someone else's family, because people are more individualistic now than we were used to, or the society was coming from. So you make a very fair point, but things have been changing, and we have to adapt. And I think CSOs, we have to be careful what we do so that we are not paternalistic or seem to be imposing a foreign agenda, but really understanding and doing this together with the local communities. And in addition to just the local community, when you go a little down, before you get to even the local community, the family. The family has actually the primary responsibility to take care of their children and all that. But one of the things we really find is the question of neglect. Especially in urban areas, you find, let's say it's a single mom. She has to really go and hustle and get the daily bread for her family. So she's out of the home, and the children are just on their own around. So who protects those children? So there are social pressures, social and economic pressure that then create a condition of vulnerability for many children. So it's a much more complex situation than we are used to, and that also you find in rural areas. So everyone has a role to play. The other thing we've been doing is many times, of course, we think, just like the question you're asking, that children themselves actually are basically recipient of adults' input or whatever adults do. But children actually have a very important role to play in their own protection. And what we have found is working with children themselves as the first line of defense, to train them, to actually have conversations with them. What issues are they going through? And you find that they actually, they know what they're going through. They know much more, things that are not usually easily spoken, but they know it among themselves. So we encourage them by them getting involved in creative arts, like having, reciting poems and different things like that, presenting that in art form to communicate to adults and to other people involved in their lives, whether it's family, government, or schools and all that, the issues they are going through. Another thing we've done, and Miriam can attest to this, is wherever we have brought in them, that facilitation of young people knowing what their rights are, what the issues, debriefing them on what the issues they are going through. We also give them a hotline so that we say, if you see something, say something. Don't just be silent. So that we can break the conspiracy of silence. And because unless something is known, it cannot be addressed. So they raise the issue. So children are an agent of their own protection. They are not just recipient of adult input or protection.
Okay.
So that's another way to look at it.
When you have a situation, for instance, where either disease or some pestilence or war has killed adults, and they no longer, they no longer are the primary caregivers, and children have to grow up rapidly and take on the role of adults.
Yeah.
An organization such as yours, what is it? What sort of protection or what sort of process do you provide to ensure that this child who is now being thrust into the role of an adult is actually protected?
So we have a number of things that we do. We have a special program we call Highly Vulnerable Children, and with that comes with additional money. And we have a process of identifying those, even among the vulnerable, there are those that are much more vulnerable than others. And I talked earlier about some homes that are headed by an older child. So in that situation, there is more care that is needed in that situation, including making sure they have the right shelter. We've done many shelters, houses in different places with solar lights and all that. So that, because there is, of course, a protection against aggressors, other people, but there's also the protection of, if you're living in a house that, say, has a leaking roof, for instance, you're not protected from the elements of the weather, and you're likely to get sick because you're much more exposed. So they are different, and also it's easy for someone to even breach that kind of a house and actually come to abuse you. But if you have a good door that can be closed, then that means you can actually sleep well at night without worrying about different predators or different, harm that can come your way. So that's one way. The other one is to do with making sure that they access the necessities of life, food, schooling. One of the things we realized, especially with this COVID situation when schools were closed for a long time, you noticed, and it was all over the media, there was a spike of sexual violence, especially against girls. And you saw there was a huge spike, not just in Kenya, but across the world. There was a huge spike of teenage pregnancies. So, but when children are in school, actually school is one of the major places where children actually find protection because it's a more protected, so it's a safe space for children. So when children are accessing school, and they are going to school, that's another place. So there are different ways to make sure that the vulnerability is reduced, and then mobilizing the people around them to be able to care and protect them, and to know what is going on in the lives of these children.
I think this conversation is formed around the question whether children are actually protected. And here we are commemorating another day of the African child. And I'm looking at some numbers here that come out contributed to by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics and other organizations. And I think in some cases it is necessary to highlight the situation so that it enables them to answer the question, or it gets people to sit up and take notice. Because these are some of the issues we speak about: the protection of children, the abuse that happens to children, the inability to make sure that we are meeting those requirements in order for rights to be met for children. But it seems to be a conversation that takes place on the surface sometimes, and nothing is actually done about it to the levels that should be. So when we're looking at 30 alerts a day about missing children, when we're looking at 3 phone calls every day to the services about children who may have gone missing, 1 child is found every day. So that means this 1 child who was found went missing at some point. Was either kidnapped or got lost along the way, was not being attended to properly. 2 children, so at the end of one day, 1 child is found. 2 children through the day. So we're looking at an average of 3 children having been taken at some point and then they are found. 43 out of 1,000 children in this country will not celebrate their 5th birthday. They will die because of a childhood disease or something else, defilement in some cases. 41.5% of children living below the poverty line. 33% of children born in this country are not registered. 1.2 million children are of school age, do not go to school for many different reasons. 1.2 million children in this country are engaged in child labor. These are just some of the questions, some of the areas that we are looking at. Can that enable us to answer the question, are our children protected?
I would say that we have a huge problem in our hand, but there is hope. I think when you look at where we have come from, and in the very fact that we are having this conversation is reason to hope. We have a huge problem. We cannot underestimate the issue that we face as a society. It's a huge issue, but the magnitude of the problem should not cause us to lose hope and to abandon any effort that we are doing. I believe the efforts we are taking, one person at a time, just like the example that is given, if how do you clean up a neighborhood? If everybody cleans up their front yard and their backyard, then the whole community will be clean, the whole place will be clean. So if every one of us was to take their responsibility, many times I think the issue we face is that we think it's someone else's issue. One of the things we really emphasize at Compassion, for instance, is that every single one of us, irrespective of the job you do, your number one job is to be an advocate for children, to be a defender and a champion of children, because every child need someone to cheer them, every child need an anchor in their lives. And that's what we hope to, and that's the message we hope we spread, whether among the caregivers, the parents, the teachers, the young people themselves as the first line of their own defense, the churches, the police, government. Everybody has a role to play. And I think as Africans, when you think about it, as Africans, I believe we've even before the advent of colonialism and the modern day society, we had our own way of dealing with this issue. So it's not like we don't know what to do. But I think we have lost the plot somewhere along the way, but we can retrace our path, and we can also adapt new tools and new approaches and new ways to deal with the magnitude of the problem. It's a significant problem. It's a significant issue. It's a huge issue. That means, therefore, that every one of us, including the media, everybody, all hands on deck, we have to do our part to protect children because it is our future, it is their future, and we can do something about it. We should never give up hope because of the magnitude of the issue.
Something that I've been well, it's been running through my head as we've been listening to this conversation. So I want to ask it. This is a large space and clearly a lot needs to be done. What specifically, or let me start again, what space, in this space, what does Compassion International do that can be identified as the thing that stands out when it comes to contributing towards the protection of the child?
We can take that and say that Compassion International has prioritized child protection in the midst of many other programs that we do, because we believe a child who is protected in the first place is able to thrive, is able to reach their full potential, because the moment a child encounters abuse or violation, it derails or interferes with their progression in life. And therefore, we have an approach we call the preventive approach as a first or the first intervention that we have to ensure that children are protected. And we do this by providing as much as possible learning and education to children and youth that we support in the program, so that they have an understanding and they know their rights, they know what to do to protect themselves, and they know where to report. And they are not only taught for themselves, but also to take care and protect their peers. Again, we do have training that we offer to the parents among the communities where we serve. We bring together parents every once in 3 months within the churches that we partner with, and we have tailored programs, tailored lessons that we take them through, and these are informed by the dynamic changes that we see in different communities, that we are able to tailor lessons or learnings that are relevant to the communities that we are serving. So we have learning for both the children and youth, and also for caregivers or the parents from time to time. And that, we believe, as we equip them and give them the skills and the knowledge they need to protect themselves and those in their community, we are moving the agenda of child protection to that level, to the grassroots level, because that's where it starts. And besides that, we also have capacity building for workers within Compassion and among the church partners that we work with. We have trainings that are also tailored to equip the staff and the workers who are interacting directly with the children, so that we are raising a community and mobilizing a community of child advocates. Because once the training is delivered to the staff and to the workers, they're able then to cascade that even to the communities in which they serve. For example, in the last 1 year, we've had 2 major trainings focusing on the protection of children, something we're calling fast care after trauma. And this was informed by the fact that there is a shortage of counseling services across the country. It's a service that is not easily available, especially in the rural areas where we have a lot of our church partners. And therefore, that was informed by the need to have people trained who can be easily accessible to the children and youth and be able to take them through a restorative process in the event that probably there's emotional trauma or abuse that has taken place in their lives. The other bit of training we've done in the last 1 year has to do with how do we have safe recruitment processes for all workers who are allowed to interact with children, so that again there's the reducing of any incidents of any workers interacting with children to be involved in any incidences of abuse. And that's where we are equipping and building the capacity of workers at the church level, who then cascade it to the community. And in that way, we believe we are preventing. We are moving the prevention agenda forward of ensuring that in the first place, the child is not abused, is not violated, because there's information, there's knowledge, and there's equipping with skills of the people around the child is one of the first line efforts to ensure children are protected. And I think, there's also the provision is made for a reporting hotline. I think Joel mentioned that, that we ensure that children have access to a line or a number they can call in case they're in need or they're in trouble. They can call and receive help on a 24-hour basis. They're able to call and get help. Yes, that's what.
Miriam Mutuku, Child Protection Specialist with Compassion International Kenya, and the organization's National Director, Joel Macharia. Thank you very much for joining us this morning on the Day of the African Child, and we wish you all the best as you continue with the work that you've been doing in the country.
Thank you for having us.
This cannot be Kenya's biggest conversation if the conversation does not mainstream the matters and the issues of the most vulnerable in the society, and that's the children. And that's why we bring these issues to the forefront as often as we do.
The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.